the day my grandfather died. My family didn't cry. At least, not the way I did. Everyone gathered inside his huge old house, wearing black clothes and pretending to mourn. But I could see it in their eyes. They weren't thinking about Grandpa. They were thinking about his money, his properties, his business, and most importantly, his will. My name is Emma Carter. I was 29 years old when my grandfather, William Carter, passed away. He wasn't just my grandfather. He was the only person in my family who had ever truly believed in me. When my parents called me a disappointment, Grandpa called me talented. When my brother Daniel failed at everything, my parents blamed the world. When I succeeded, they acted as if it didn't matter. But Grandpa always noticed.
He used to tell me,
Emma, one day you'll understand that family isn't always the people who share your blood. I never understood what he meant until the day he died. Grandpa's funeral was held on a cold Friday morning. After everyone left the cemetery, we returned to his house. My mother, Linda, sat beside my father, Robert. My older brother Daniel stood near the fireplace, and my Aunt Susan was whispering to my father. I walked into the room. Everyone immediately became quiet. I knew something was wrong. Then my father cleared his throat. Emma. I looked at him. Yes, we need to discuss Grandpa's estate. My stomach tightened. Already. Daniel laughed. Why wait? I looked at him. He didn't even try to hide his excitement. My father placed a folder on the table. The lawyer will arrive tomorrow. Until then, we've decided how the family property should be handled. I stared at him. What do you mean? My mother answered. Your grandfather's main house will go to Daniel. I blinked. What? Daniel smiled. The business will remain with Dad. And the investment accounts will be divided between the family. I stared at them. And me. Silence. My father looked away, then said, You'll receive something. What? A small cash payment. How small? He pushed an envelope toward me. I opened it. There was a check inside. $10,000. I stared at it, then looked up. That's it. Daniel laughed. Be grateful. I couldn't believe him. Grandpa owned 6 properties. He had 3 businesses. And millions in investments. My father interrupted me. Those assets belong to the family. And you're part of the family. So, why am I getting almost nothing? My mother sighed. Because your grandfather knew Daniel needed stability. I looked at Daniel. Stability. He had just bought a brand new sports car 2 weeks earlier. He had never held a job longer than 6 months. And somehow, he needed Grandpa's entire estate. I looked at my father. Did Grandpa really leave this? My father became angry. Don't question the will. That sentence stayed with me. Because if everything was legitimate, why was he so nervous? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandpa, about the last conversation we'd had. 3 weeks before his death, I had visited him at the hospital. He had been weak, but strangely calm. He held my hand. Emma? Yes, Grandpa. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone who suddenly becomes very interested in what I left behind. I laughed nervously. Grandpa, you're going to be fine. He smiled. I hope so. Then he whispered, but remember something. What? If they tell you that you inherited nothing, don't believe them. I had thought he was confused. Now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, the family lawyer arrived. His name was Mr. Anderson. He carried a leather briefcase. Everyone sat around the dining table. My father sat at the head. Daniel sat beside him. My mother held her hands together. I sat alone. Mr. Anderson opened the folder. Before I read the will, he looked at my father. There's something unusual. My father's face changed. What? Mr. Anderson continued. Mr. Carter requested that the original will be read only after all immediate family members were present. Daniel frowned. We're all here. Mr. Anderson looked around. Then his eyes stopped on me. Yes. He opened the document and began reading. To my beloved granddaughter, Emma Carter. My heart stopped. Daniel suddenly sat upright. My father said, Wait, Mr. Anderson stopped. What? My father stood. That's not the version we were given. I stared at him. What did you say? My father's face went pale. Mr. Anderson slowly closed the folder. What version were you given? My father didn't answer. Daniel stood too. There's been a mistake. Mr. Anderson looked at him. I don't make mistakes with legal documents. Silence filled the room. Then Mr. Anderson pulled another envelope from his briefcase. It was sealed, and written across the front were 5 words. For Emma, after my death. My hands began shaking. Mr. Anderson placed it in front of me. Your grandfather personally gave me this envelope 6 months ago. My father stepped forward. Emma doesn't need to open that. Mr. Anderson looked at him. I'm afraid she does. I looked at my father. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Grandpa's handwriting. I read the first line. Emma, if your father is telling you that you inherited almost nothing, then the people around you have already lied to you. My heart pounded. I continued. The money is not the most important thing I left you. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I left you the one thing your family has spent 20 years trying to steal. I looked up. What does that mean? Nobody answered. Then I turned the page. There was one final sentence. Look inside the old library wall, behind the painting of your grandmother. I slowly raised my eyes toward the hallway. The old library was only a few steps away. Daniel suddenly moved toward the door. I stood. Where are you going? He stopped. Nowhere. But his face had gone completely white. And that was when I realized Daniel already knew what was behind that wall. I walked toward the library. Behind me, my father shouted, Emma, don't open that painting. I stopped. Then slowly smiled. Because Grandpa had been right. They weren't afraid of me finding nothing. They were afraid I would finally find the truth. I stood in front of the painting. My father's voice was still echoing behind me. Emma, don't open that painting. I turned around. He was standing in the doorway. His face was pale. Daniel stood behind him. Neither of them looked angry anymore. They looked terrified. I stared at my father. Why? He didn't answer. What's behind it? Nothing. I smiled bitterly. Then why are you afraid of me opening it? My mother suddenly began crying. Emma, please. I looked at her. Please what? Just leave it alone. Grandpa specifically told me to look behind it. My father stepped forward. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly near the end. I shook my head. He was clear enough to know you were lying. The room went silent. Then I reached for the painting. Daniel suddenly grabbed my wrist. Don't. I looked at his hand. Then at his face. Let go. He released me. I pulled the painting from the wall. Behind it was a small wooden panel, and carved into that panel were 2 words. For Emma. My heart began pounding. I pushed the panel. It opened. Inside was a narrow compartment. There was a small black box. I pulled it out. My father whispered, No. I looked at him. You know what's inside. He didn't answer. I carried the box back to the dining room. Mr. Anderson followed me. Daniel remained frozen near the library. I placed the box on the table. There was a tiny lock. I remembered the brass key Grandpa had given me months earlier. I had kept it on my keychain without knowing why. I pulled it out. The key fit perfectly. Click. The box opened. Inside was a USB drive, a stack of bank documents, and another envelope. My name was written across it. I opened the envelope. Grandpa's handwriting appeared again. Emma, if you found this, then your family has already attempted to take control of my estate. I swallowed. Mr. Anderson leaned closer. I continued reading. The official will you were shown is not the final version. My father slammed his hand against the table. Enough. Everyone jumped. He pointed at Mr. Anderson. That document is invalid. Mr. Anderson calmly replied, Robert, you should be very careful about what you say next. My father went silent. I picked up the bank documents. There were accounts I had never heard of, property transfers, company records. investment statements. Then I saw something shocking. A property had been transferred from Grandpa's name to Daniel Carter. The transfer happened 8 months before Grandpa died. I looked at my brother. You stole his property. Daniel shook his head. No. The document has your name on it. Grandpa gave it to me. I looked at Mr. Anderson. Did he? Mr. Anderson studied the document. No. Daniel's face changed. This transfer was never authorized by your grandfather. My mother started crying harder. I turned toward her. Mom, did you know? She couldn't look at me. That was my answer. Then I opened the USB drive. There was one video. I clicked it. Grandpa appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his study. His voice was calm. Emma, if you're watching this, I've already gone. I fought back tears. I know your parents will tell you that Daniel deserves everything. They'll tell you that you're young. They'll tell you that you can build your own life. He paused. But that's not the truth. My grandfather leaned toward the camera. Your father has been taking money from my company for years. I looked at my father. He didn't move. Your brother has been using my property as collateral for loans. Daniel whispered. That's not true. But Grandpa continued. And your mother knows. My mother covered her face. I felt sick. Then Grandpa said, I gave them opportunities. They chose greed. The video continued. I didn't leave you money because I wanted you to become wealthy. I left you control. Control of the company. Control of the properties. And control of the family trust. My heart stopped. Then Grandpa smiled sadly. Because I know something about you, Emma. You don't need wealth to be powerful. You need the courage to say no. The screen went black. Nobody spoke. I looked at Mr. Anderson. Is this real? He nodded. Yes. Then why did my father tell me I was getting $10,000? Mr. Anderson looked directly at my father. That's something he'll need to explain. My father's face had completely changed. Suddenly, Daniel grabbed the USB drive. He tried to run. Mr. Anderson shouted, Daniel. Daniel stopped at the doorway. I looked at him. Where are you going? He turned around. You don't understand. Then explain. He said nothing. I walked toward him. You knew about the hidden box. No. You knew Grandpa left something for me. No. Then why did you try to stop me? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Because. He swallowed. Because Dad told me what would happen if you found it. I stared at him. What would happen? Daniel looked at our father. My father said nothing. Daniel finally whispered. He told me we'd lose everything. Mr. Anderson immediately called his office. Within an hour, the documents were copied. The video was secured. The original will was placed into legal custody. And my father's carefully constructed story began collapsing. But Grandpa wasn't finished. There was one final document inside the box. I opened it. It wasn't a will. It was a list. Names, dates, payments. And beside each payment, a signature. At the bottom was my father's name. But the final page contained something even worse. A transfer scheduled for 3 days after Grandpa's funeral. The recipient was a company I didn't recognize. I searched the name on my phone. My blood ran cold. It was a shell company controlled by Daniel. They weren't simply stealing Grandpa's inheritance. They were preparing to sell his remaining assets before anyone could challenge them. And the deadline was only 2 days away. I looked at Mr. Anderson. What happens if they complete this transfer? He answered quietly. We could spend years trying to recover everything. I looked at my father, then at Daniel, then at my mother. For the first time, I wasn't the frightened granddaughter sitting at the table. I was the person Grandpa had prepared for this moment. I closed the folder. Then we stopped them. My father laughed bitterly. You think you can run my company? I looked him straight in the eyes. No, I don't think I can. I picked up Grandpa's original will. I know I can. And that was the moment my family's battle over Grandpa's fortune truly began. The next morning, I walked into my father's company for the first time as its new controlling owner. Every employee stared at me. Some looked confused. Some looked nervous, and some already knew what was happening. My father had spent years building his reputation as the man in charge. Now, everyone was waiting to see whether I could actually take his place. I didn't go there to prove myself. I went there to protect what Grandpa had left me. Mr. Anderson met me in the lobby. "We have a problem." "What kind?" "Your father has already moved several company accounts." I froze. "How much?" "Nearly $2 million. My stomach dropped. "Where?" "Several overseas accounts." "And the transfer scheduled for tomorrow?" "We've already filed an emergency request to stop it." I nodded. "Good." But Mr. Anderson didn't look relieved. "There's more." "What?" "Your father is claiming the original will was created under suspicious circumstances." I stared at him. "He's challenging Grandpa's will?" "Yes." "On what grounds?" "He claims your grandfather wasn't mentally competent when he signed it." I almost laughed. "Grandpa recorded a video explaining everything." "That helps. But it doesn't automatically settle the case." I looked at him. "Then we'll find more evidence." I returned to Grandpa's house. The library was exactly as I had left it. The hidden compartment was empty now. But something kept bothering me. Grandpa wouldn't have hidden only one box. He had always been careful. He always planned several steps ahead. I walked around the room. I touched the books, opened the drawers, checked behind the furniture. Nothing. Then I remembered something. When I was a child, Grandpa had taught me a strange game. He would stand in front of the bookshelf and say, "Every secret has a door." Then he'd ask me, "Where would you hide a door if you didn't want anyone to find it?" I used to answer, "Behind a book." He would laugh. Too obvious. I looked at the bookshelf, then at the wall. I began pulling books out one by one. Nothing. Until I reached an old leather-bound book. It wouldn't move. I pulled harder. Click. The entire shelf moved backward. I stepped away. A narrow opening appeared. Behind it was a small room. Inside was a desk, a chair, and dozens of files. I whispered, "Grandpa." There was a photograph on the desk. It showed Grandpa standing beside a young woman. I picked it up. On the back was written, "Elizabeth, 1998. I didn't recognize her. Then I found a letter. It explained everything. Elizabeth had been Grandpa's first business partner. She had helped him build Carter Industries. But years later, she disappeared. The company records claimed she had sold her shares. But Grandpa's letter said otherwise. Elizabeth never sold anything. My heart started racing. I kept reading. Robert and Daniel know what happened. I froze. My father, my brother, what had they done? I searched through the files. There were old contracts, bank statements, property documents. Then I found a photograph of Elizabeth with my father. They were standing outside the original company building. On the back, 6 months before Elizabeth disappeared. I suddenly understood. My family had been hiding secrets for decades. This wasn't just about Grandpa's inheritance. It went back to the beginning of the Carter fortune. I called Mr. Anderson. "You need to come here." "What did you find?" "I think Grandpa's entire company was built on a lie." There was silence. "Are you sure?" "I found documents." "I'll be there." 2 hours later, Mr. Anderson examined everything. He looked shocked. "Emma?" "What?" "If these documents are authentic, your grandfather's company wasn't supposed to belong entirely to your family. Then who owns it?" "Elizabeth's estate." I stared at him. "But she's gone." Her shares were never legally transferred. I felt dizzy. "Then why did Grandpa leave the company to me?" Mr. Anderson pointed to another document. "Because your grandfather apparently bought those shares back years ago." "Legally?" He shook his head. "No, not legally." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He showed me the document. Grandpa had spent years trying to correct the mistake. He had planned to transfer a large portion of the company to Elizabeth's surviving family. But someone had stopped him. The signature on the blocking document was my father's. My hands began shaking. My father hadn't simply stolen from Grandpa. He had prevented Grandpa from correcting a decades-old injustice. And suddenly, I understood why Grandpa had trusted me. He wasn't just leaving me an inheritance. He was giving me the responsibility to fix what the family had broken. That evening, my mother came to see me. She looked exhausted. "Emma?" I didn't invite her inside. "What do you want?" She looked at the house. "Your grandfather wanted you to know everything." I stared at her. "You knew about Elizabeth?" She closed her eyes. "Yes." "You knew Dad was hiding her shares?" "Yes." "You knew Daniel was stealing from Grandpa?" "Yes." I felt betrayed all over again. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared." "Of Dad?" She shook her head. "Of what your father would do if I exposed him." I stared at her. "What did he do?" She began crying. "He threatened to destroy your life." I felt a chill. "How?" "He had been monitoring your finances. He knew where you worked. He knew about your savings. And he planned to make sure you couldn't fight him." I stepped back. "So, the $10,000 check was meant to make you disappear." I couldn't believe it. My own father had planned to erase me from the family. Then Mom handed me an envelope. "I should have given you this years ago." I opened it. Inside was an old photograph. Grandpa, Elizabeth, and a little girl. I looked closely. The little girl was Elizabeth's granddaughter. On the back, Grandpa had written, "Find her." I looked at Mom. "Where is she?" Mom whispered, "She lives in this city." "What's her name?" "Grace Miller." My heart started pounding. Why does Grandpa want me to find her? Mom looked at me. Because she is the person who can prove who really owns the company. The next morning, I found Grace. She was 34. She had no idea who I was. When I told her about Elizabeth, she almost walked away. But then I showed her Grandpa's photograph. Her face changed. "Where did you get this?" "From my grandfather." She stared at the picture, then whispered, "My grandmother said your family stole everything from her." I swallowed. She was right. Grace looked at me. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I'm trying to fix it." She laughed bitterly. "Your family has been saying that for 20 years. I understood her anger. But I wasn't there to defend my family. I was there to end their lies. I handed her the documents. "Read them." She did. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she looked at me. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I want you to have what your grandmother was denied." She stared at me for a long time, then finally said, "Then I'll help you." That night, Grace gave me one final piece of evidence, an old cassette tape. Her grandmother had recorded it shortly before she disappeared. We found an old player and listened. Elizabeth's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, then Robert has already taken control." I looked at Grace. The recording continued. "But there is one person he cannot control." A pause. Then Elizabeth said a name. "William." "Grandpa." Then came the sentence that shocked me. "William knows the truth about Robert's first crime." The tape ended. I stared at the machine. Grace looked at me. "What was his first crime?" I shook my head. "I don't know." Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Stop digging into the past." A second message arrived. "Or you'll end up like Elizabeth." I stared at the screen. Someone was watching us. And whoever it was, they knew exactly what we had found. I stared at the anonymous message. "Stop digging into the past." Then another message appeared. "Or you'll end up like Elizabeth." For several seconds, neither Grace nor I spoke. Finally, Grace whispered, "Someone knows we're investigating." I nodded. "And they're scared." "Of what?" "The truth." The next morning, I took the cassette to an audio specialist. We needed a clean copy of the recording. If someone tried to claim it had been altered, we wanted proof. While we waited, Grace and I went through Elizabeth's old documents. We discovered something strange. Elizabeth hadn't disappeared. At least, not in the way everyone believed. According to an old hospital record, she had been admitted under a different name 22 years ago. She had survived. And she had left the hospital 3 days later. I stared at the document. She was alive. Grace looked shocked. My grandmother never told anyone. Why? Maybe she was hiding. Then I noticed the address listed on the record. A small town almost 4 hours away. We drove there that afternoon. The address belonged to an old retirement home. I walked inside and asked the receptionist, "Is there a woman named Elizabeth Miller living here?" The receptionist checked the computer, then looked at me strangely. She passed away 2 years ago. Grace's face fell, but she left something for her granddaughter. The receptionist disappeared into another room. When she returned, she was carrying a small wooden box. She specifically said, "If Grace Miller ever came looking for her, give her this." Grace opened the box. Inside was a handwritten letter. Her hands trembled. She began reading. "Grace, if you are reading this, then the Carter family has finally discovered what happened." Grace looked at me. I continued reading. "Your grandmother's shares were never stolen by William." I froze. "What?" The letter continued. "William tried to protect me. Then came the shocking part. The person who betrayed me was Robert Carter. My father." I couldn't breathe. Elizabeth explained everything. 22 years ago, my father had been working for Grandpa. He wasn't the owner. He wasn't even a partner. He was an ambitious young employee. Elizabeth discovered that Robert had been secretly transferring company money into accounts he controlled. She confronted him. He begged her not to report him. She refused. So he forged documents claiming Elizabeth had sold her shares. Then he used the stolen money to purchase property. When Elizabeth threatened to expose him, Robert threatened her family. She disappeared to protect them. But Grandpa eventually discovered the truth. And that's when he began secretly gathering evidence. I read the final paragraph. William promised me he would expose Robert one day. But Robert discovered what William was doing. That's why William created the hidden files. I looked at Grace. Your grandmother knew everything. Grace wiped her tears. And your grandfather tried to fix it. I nodded, but Dad stopped him. Then we found something even more important. A second envelope. It contained the original share certificates. Elizabeth had never sold them. She still legally owned them. And after her death, they belonged to Grace. I looked at her. You are the rightful owner of part of my family's company. Grace shook her head. I don't want revenge. Neither do I. Then what do you want? The truth. She nodded. Then let's expose it. That evening, I returned home. My mother was waiting for me. She looked terrified. Emma? Where's Dad? He went to the office. Why? She lowered her voice. Because he knows. I froze. Knows what? That you found Elizabeth's documents. I stared at her. How? Your father has someone following you. My stomach dropped. Who? I don't know. Mom. She grabbed my hand. Please. Stop. I pulled away. No. I'm done being afraid. She started crying. You don't understand what your father is capable of. I looked at her. I understand now. The next morning, I received an invitation. A private family meeting. My father had arranged it at the Carter headquarters. Everyone was there. My parents, Daniel, my Aunt Susan, several family lawyers, and a man I'd never seen before. My father stood at the front of the room. Emma. I sat down. What is this? He smiled. We're going to settle the inheritance issue. I looked around. Really? Yes. He placed a document in front of me. If you sign this, you'll receive $500,000. I stared at him. In exchange for what? You surrender all claims to the company. I almost laughed. You mean Grandpa's company? Yes. And the house. You can keep the house. I looked at him. You want me to sign away millions for $500,000? He leaned forward. You should be grateful. I smiled. That sounds familiar. Then the strange man beside him spoke. Ms. Carter, you should consider the offer. I looked at him. Who are you? He smiled. My name is Victor Lane. My heart stopped. The same Victor who had worked with Michael. I looked at my father. You brought him here? Victor smiled. Your father and I have worked together for many years. I stood up. Then you already know what I found. Victor's smile disappeared. My father slammed his hand on the table. Sit down. I didn't. Instead, I placed Elizabeth's original share certificate on the table. Everyone went silent. Then I placed Grandpa's original will beside it. And finally, I placed the cassette recording. My father stared at the evidence. His face became completely pale. I looked at him. You wanted me to sign away my future. I shook my head. But you forgot one thing. He stared at me. What? I smiled. Grandpa left me the truth. Victor suddenly stood. You have no idea what you're doing. I looked at him. Actually, I know exactly what I'm doing. Then I pressed play on my phone. Elizabeth's voice filled the room. The person who betrayed me was Robert Carter. My father's face collapsed. Nobody moved. The recording continued. Then came another voice. My grandfather's. I had never heard this part before. If Robert ever tries to take the company, give everything to Emma. My father whispered. No. I looked at him. Yes. Then the conference room doors opened. Several investigators walked inside. One of them approached my father. Mr. Carter, we need to speak with you.
My father looked at me.
You called them? I shook my head.
No.
I sent the evidence to them yesterday. His expression changed. For the first time, he realized he couldn't control the story anymore. But then Victor suddenly reached into his jacket, and everything happened at once. He pulled out a phone, looked at the screen, then whispered. They found the second account. My father stared at him. What second account? Victor looked terrified. I thought you knew. I looked between them. Second account.
Victor said nothing.
Then my mother whispered. Emma, there is something you still don't know. I turned toward her. What? She looked at my father, then back at me, and said, Your grandfather didn't hide the money from them. He hid it from us. I froze.
Why?
Mom's eyes filled with tears. Because the money was never his. My mother's words echoed through the room. The money was never his. I stared at her. What do you mean? She looked at Grandpa's documents. Your grandfather spent his entire life trying to return it. I felt confused. Return what? Mom took a deep breath. The money came from Elizabeth's family. I looked at Grace.
She was just as shocked.
What? Mom continued. Years ago, Elizabeth's family owned a large manufacturing company. Robert discovered how valuable it was. He secretly transferred money from their accounts. Then he used that money to help build your grandfather's business. I turned toward my father. Is that true? He said nothing. That silence was enough. Grace stepped forward. So my grandmother's money built the Carter Empire? Mom nodded. Part of it. And Grandpa knew? Eventually, Grace's eyes filled with tears. Then why didn't he return it? Mom answered quietly. Because by the time he discovered the truth, Robert had already hidden most of the money. And your grandfather spent years trying to recover it. I looked at the documents. Suddenly, everything made sense. The secret accounts, the shell companies, the hidden files, the strange payments. Grandpa hadn't been protecting the family fortune. He had been trying to dismantle a fortune built on stolen money. My father finally spoke. You don't understand. I turned toward him. Then explain.
He looked exhausted.
I made mistakes. That's not an explanation. I was young. You stole from Elizabeth. I borrowed money. You forged documents. I was desperate. You threatened her. He looked away. I stepped closer. And when Grandpa found out, you stole from him too. My father's voice became quiet. I was afraid. Of what? Of losing everything. I shook my head. You already lost everything. You just didn't realize it yet. The investigators took my father and Victor into another room. Daniel sat silently in the corner. He looked broken. I walked toward him. Did you know? He shook his head. Not all of it. But you knew Dad was stealing. Yes. You helped him.
He looked at me.
I was stupid. I didn't answer. Then he whispered. Emma? I need to tell you something.
What?
There's another property. I frowned. What property? Grandpa owned a warehouse outside the city. Nobody knows about it, not even Dad. I stared at him. Why are you telling me? Because that's where he kept the final records. My heart started pounding. Where? Daniel gave me the address. Then he looked down. Please, find them. Grace and I drove there that evening. The warehouse looked abandoned. The windows were covered with dust. The doors were rusted, but the key Daniel gave us opened the main entrance.
The side.
There were hundreds of boxes. We searched for nearly an hour. Then Grace noticed something. A box labeled, Elizabeth Miller, Original Records. We opened it. Inside were contracts, bank statements, property deeds, and one large black ledger. I opened it. Every transaction was recorded. Every dollar, every transfer, every name. At the very end was a final entry. $18,400,000. I stared at the number. That's $18 million. Grace looked at me. Where did it go? I turned the page. There was only one sentence. Transferred to the person who deserves the truth. Underneath was my name, Emma Carter. I couldn't speak. Grandpa hadn't left me the money. He had left me the evidence proving where it belonged. Then we found the final letter. It was addressed to both of us. Emma Carter and Grace Miller. I opened it. If you are reading this together, then the truth has finally survived. I looked at Grace. She began crying. The letter continued. The money belongs to Elizabeth's family. The company belongs to those who helped build it honestly. And the Carter family must finally face what it did. Then came the final paragraph. Emma, I know you may be angry, but don't use this truth to destroy people. Use it to build something better. I folded the letter. Grandpa had known me better than anyone. The next day, the entire story exploded publicly. The investigators released the evidence. News outlets reported the decades-old financial fraud. Victor cooperated with prosecutors. My father faced multiple charges. Daniel admitted his involvement. And the Carter family name, which my father had spent decades protecting, was suddenly everywhere. But I didn't celebrate, because Grandpa hadn't wanted revenge. He wanted justice. The court later confirmed that Elizabeth's family was entitled to a substantial portion of the assets. Grace became the legal representative of her grandmother's estate. The company was restructured, and I gave up my claim to the money that wasn't rightfully mine. Instead, I kept only what Grandpa had specifically left me, the family home, not because it was worth millions, but because it was the place where Grandpa had taught me what honesty meant. Months later, I visited my father in prison. He looked older, much older. He stared at me through the glass. Why did you come? I answered. Because I wanted to tell you something. He waited. I don't hate you. His eyes filled with tears. But I will never forget what you did. He nodded. I know. I hope one day you understand. I wasn't trying to destroy you. I was trying to stop you from destroying everyone else. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. I stood up, then said, that's between you and Grandpa. I walked away. Outside the prison, Grace was waiting. She held the old ledger. What are you going to do with it? I smiled. Something Grandpa would have wanted. What? I looked toward the city. End the Carter legacy of secrets. And start something new. Grace smiled. But before we could leave, my phone rang. It was Mr. Anderson. Emma? What happened? We found one final document. I stopped. What document? Your grandfather's final instructions. Where? In his personal safe. My heart began beating faster. What does it say? There was a long silence. Then Mr. Anderson said, your grandfather left you one final decision to make. I frowned. What decision? He replied, whether to keep the Carter name or destroy it forever. I looked at Grace. Neither of us spoke, because suddenly, I realized the biggest revenge hadn't happened yet. I couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Anderson's words. Your grandfather left you one final decision, whether to keep the Carter name or destroy it forever. I drove straight to his office. Grace came with me. When we arrived, Mr. Anderson was waiting beside a large black safe. This was your grandfather's personal safe. I stared at it. Why didn't anyone open it before? Because your grandfather instructed me not to. Until when? Until you and Grace discovered the truth. He handed me a key. I inserted it. The lock clicked.
Inside,
There was only one envelope. No money. No jewelry. No property documents. Just a handwritten message. Emma, read this alone. I looked at Grace. She nodded. I'll wait outside. I opened the envelope. Grandpa's letter began. Emma, if you've reached this point, then you now know what your family did. I swallowed. You also know what Elizabeth's family lost. Then came the sentence I wasn't expecting. But there is one final truth I never told you. I continued reading. The Carter name was never meant to belong to you. I stopped. My heart sank. Then I read the next paragraph. I wanted you to inherit the house because it was the only honest thing I could leave you. But I never wanted you to inherit the company. I stared at the page. What? Grandpa explained that after discovering my father's crimes, he had secretly planned to dissolve Carter Industries. He wanted the legitimate assets returned to the people who had been harmed. The company itself was supposed to disappear, but there was one condition. He wanted me to make the final decision. I called Grace back inside. Read this. She took the letter. After a few minutes, she looked at me. He's giving you a choice. I nodded. Keep the company alive. Or shut it down. Exactly. What would you do? I looked at Grandpa's photograph. I don't know. Then I noticed another line. I had almost missed it. If you choose to preserve the company, never preserve the name. I looked at Grace. Why? She read the next sentence aloud. Because a name built on stolen trust should never be allowed to become a symbol of success. I felt tears in my eyes. Grandpa wasn't asking me to destroy my family's legacy. He was asking me to redefine it. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting. Every senior employee, every remaining board member, several attorneys. Grace was there. Mr. Anderson stood beside me. Everyone waited for me to speak. I placed Grandpa's letter on the table. The Carter family has spent decades protecting a name. Today, I'm ending that. People began whispering. I continued. The company will not close. But the Carter name will disappear from it. A board member stood. Then what happens to the company? I looked at Grace. She smiled. I answered. It will become the Carter Foundation for Ethical Business. The company would fund scholarships, small business grants, legal assistance for people harmed by financial fraud. And every year, a portion of the profits would go directly toward families affected by corporate abuse. The room became silent. Then Grace stood. I have something to add. She placed Elizabeth's original share certificates on the table. My grandmother's family was robbed, but Emma chose not to keep what wasn't hers. She looked around the room. Instead, she offered to return the rightful assets. Several people stared at us. Grace continued. I accept. And I will help build the foundation. That was the moment the company changed forever. But there was one final problem. My father still had legal claims against several properties. Even from prison, he was trying to stop the restructuring. His attorneys argued that Grandpa's final documents were invalid. So we went to court. The courtroom was packed. My father sat on the other side. Daniel was there too. My mother sat behind them. I took the witness stand. The opposing attorney asked, Ms. Carter, isn't it true that you stand to benefit financially from your grandfather's estate? I answered honestly, yes. And isn't it true that your family business could make you extremely wealthy? It could. Then why should this court believe you're acting out of principle? I looked at him. Because I already gave up millions of dollars. The courtroom went silent. I could have kept the money. I could have fought Grace. I could have protected my family name, but I didn't. Because my grandfather taught me that wealth means nothing when it's built on someone else's loss. Then Mr. Anderson presented the final evidence. Grandpa's handwritten instructions. Elizabeth's original documents. The financial records. the recordings, and the original will. The judge reviewed everything, then delivered the decision. The fraudulent transfers were canceled. The stolen assets were returned. The company restructuring was approved. My father's remaining claims were rejected, and the Carter name was removed from the company's ownership structure. I closed my eyes. It was over. After the hearing, my father asked to speak with me. I almost refused, but I agreed.
He looked at me.
I used to think you were weak. I said nothing. I thought because you were quiet, you wouldn't fight me. I looked at him. You were wrong. He nodded. I was. Then he whispered, your grandfather would be proud. I stared at him. Maybe. He looked down. I destroyed everything. I corrected him.
No.
You destroyed yourself. I just stopped you from taking me with you. He began crying. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. That evening, I returned to Grandpa's house. I walked into the library. The painting was still hanging on the wall. The same painting that had started everything. I touched it. Behind that wall, I had found the truth. But Grandpa had left something else behind. A lesson. Family isn't about who gets the biggest inheritance. It's about who stands beside you when everything falls apart. I sat in his old chair. Then I noticed something underneath the desk. A tiny envelope.
My name was written on it.
I opened it. Inside was one final sentence. Emma, the greatest revenge is not watching them lose everything. I smiled through my tears. Then read the rest. It's becoming everything they said you could never be. I folded the letter and finally understood. Grandpa had never wanted me to destroy my family. He wanted me to become strong enough that they could never destroy me again. But just as I stood up, my phone rang. It was Mr. Anderson. His voice sounded urgent. Emma, what happened? We found another account. I froze. Whose account? He hesitated, then said, your mother's. My heart stopped, because according to the records, the account had received $1.7 million on the exact day Grandpa died. I couldn't move. Mr. Anderson's words kept replaying in my mind. $1.7 million. Whose account? He answered quietly. Your mother's. I closed my eyes. After everything, there was still another secret. I drove straight to his office. Grace was already there. Mr. Anderson placed the bank statement in front of me. The transfer was dated the exact day Grandpa died. The money had come from an account connected to one of Grandpa's companies. The recipient? My mother's private account. I looked at Grace. She knew. Grace shook her head. Maybe there's an explanation. I wanted to believe her. So I called Mom. Mom. She answered immediately. Emma? Did Grandpa give you $1.7 million? Silence. That silence told me everything. Finally, she whispered. Where did you find that? My heart sank. So it's true. Emma, please. Why? I can explain. Then explain. She began crying. I didn't steal it. Then where did it come from? It was your grandfather's money. Why was it in your account? She took a long breath. Because he asked me to hide it. I froze. What? Mom explained everything. 2 days before Grandpa died, he discovered that my father had planned to transfer the remaining company assets to an overseas account. Grandpa knew he might not have enough time to stop him, so he gave Mom the money. He told her to hide it until everything was resolved. But there was one problem. Mom had never told anyone.
Not me.
Not Mr. Anderson. Not even Grandpa's lawyer. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Of Dad. Yes. He told me that if I exposed him, he would make sure you lost everything. I stared at the bank statement. So, you protected me. Mom whispered. Your grandfather told me that one day you would understand. I closed my eyes. For years, I had believed my mother had chosen Daniel, but she had been secretly protecting me. Mom. Yes. Where is the money now? She began crying. I never spent it. Then where? I put it in another account. Whose name? Yours. I froze. My name? Your grandfather opened it. He wanted you to have it after everything was settled. I couldn't speak. Grandpa had planned for everything. Even this. The next morning, we went to the bank. The account contained exactly $1,700,000. No withdrawals. No transfers. Nothing had been touched. Mr. Anderson verified the documents. It's legally yours. I stared at the number. For months, my family had fought over millions. And Grandpa had quietly protected one small part of his wealth for me. Not to make me rich, but to make sure I could start over. I made my decision. I kept enough money to secure my future. The rest, I donated to the foundation. Grace donated part of her family's recovered assets too. Together, we created a scholarship program in Grandpa and Elizabeth's names. Every year, young people from struggling families would receive financial support. People who had once been told, "You can't," would finally hear, "You can." 6 months later, the Carter family home reopened. But it wasn't a mansion anymore. It was a community center. The library became a free legal help room. The workshop became a training center. The old dining room became a classroom. And on the wall, I placed 2 photographs.
Grandpa.
And Elizabeth. Underneath them was one sentence. Truth belongs to everyone. My mother moved into a small apartment. She visited the center every weekend. She never asked for money. She never asked for forgiveness. She simply helped. And slowly, our relationship began healing. Not because I forgot what happened, but because she finally stopped hiding the truth. Daniel served his sentence. But before he left, he sent me a letter. I opened it one evening. It said, "Emma, I used to think Grandpa loved you more because he trusted you. Now I understand. He trusted you because you never demanded what wasn't yours." I folded the letter. Maybe Daniel finally understood. Maybe he didn't. Either way, it no longer mattered. My father never got the life he wanted. The company he tried to control was gone. The Carter name he had protected for decades disappeared from the business. His stolen fortune was recovered, and his lies were exposed. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt free, because revenge had never really been about destroying my father. It was about refusing to become him. 1 year after Grandpa's death, I stood in front of the community center. Hundreds of people were gathered. Grace stood beside me. My mother sat in the front row. Mr. Anderson was there too. I looked at the building, then at the photograph of Grandpa, and I finally understood his last lesson. He didn't leave me the biggest inheritance. He left me something more valuable. The courage to uncover the truth. The courage to walk away from greed. The courage to forgive without surrendering. And the courage to build something better from the ruins my family had created. That evening, I returned to the old library one final time. I sat in Grandpa's chair. The room was quiet. The sunset came through the window. I held his final letter in my hands. Then I whispered, "Grandpa, you were right." I smiled. "You told me family isn't always about blood. And now I understand." I looked at the photographs. Sometimes, family is simply the people who choose not to betray you. I turned off the light, closed the door, and walked away. Not as the granddaughter who had been forced out. Not as the girl they had tried to silence. Not as the heir they tried to cheat. But as the woman Grandpa had always believed I could become. And that was the greatest revenge of all.